Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make some simple cabinet doors. The doors that we're going to be making are going to be meant to replicate existing doors at a built-in at my in-laws' house. So they have this nice built-in going down the length of their family room wall, and at the end of it there was a little desk built into it, and now they want to get rid of that desk and just have the cabinets going all the way down. So I went ahead and I grabbed the door from them, and you could see the stiles and the rails have this little ornate roundover, and we have a raised panel. So we're not going to be able to do this door on the table saw, which is the easiest approach to doing that, but we can do this on the router table with a door bit set, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do right now. All right, so first thing we need to go over real quick is just the anatomy of the door in general. So there's really three separate components that go into the door. You have your panel, which is the center portion of the door. You have your stiles, which are the vertical portions of the door, and you have your rails, which are the top and the bottom. This door is painted, so it's kind of hard to tell, but the stiles run all the way to the top and the bottom, and the rails are actually butted up against the stiles. So what this means when we're getting our lumber ready is our stiles we can cut to the final dimension of the door. Although we're not going to do that, we're going to cut them long, and I'll explain why. And then our rails, we need to cut them slightly longer than what you see here is the presented piece of the rail, because it's going to have a tenon that is going to be extending into this stile, which is going to be what holds the door together once it's glued together. That tenon's going to be the surface area for the glue to adhere to. So there's a few different ways to make cabinet doors. The easiest, in my opinion, is on the table saw, but there's only so many different styles that you can make using the table saw. The next easiest approach is using the router table, combined with bit kits like this. So this kit right here, this is for a shaker style door, and you have your bit that's going to cut your rails, and then you have a bit that's going to cut the groove into your stiles. Now for the doors that we're going to be making today, we're going to be using this kit, and same thing, you have your bit, that's going to cut your rails. Then you have your cutter that's going to cut your stiles, and in this case, not only is it cutting the groove, it's also cutting that round over on the top. And then we have a panel bit to produce the raised panel that we're going to put in the center of the door. And since the doors are going to be painted, we're going to be using poplar for the rails and the stiles, the perimeter of the door. And then for the panel in the center, we're going to use a piece of MDF. MDF because, one, that's what the rest of their built-ins are made out of as far as the center panel of the door. Two, because it's going to paint really, really well. And three, because it is relatively cheap in comparison to plywood, or milling up the hardwood poplar to make the panel ourselves. So since I bought all pre-milled lumber from the big box store to keep this simple, first step, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take that 1x3 poplar stock, we're going to bring it over to the miter saw and cut all the stiles and rails to rough lengths. Now we're making 2 doors, so that's going to be 4 stiles and 4 rails. So now that we have the rails and stiles cut to length, we're going to go ahead and jump on over to the table saw and rip all of them down to their final widths. Okay, so the next step here is we're setting up our router table, and we're gonna start with preparing the rails. All the doors I've ever built using the router table, I've always started with the rails. I don't know if it makes a difference to start with the stiles or not, but I've always done the rails and they've come out fine. So the most important thing here is getting your back fence perfectly in line with the bearing. So the easiest way to do that is to take some sort of straight edge. I like using this large framing square, and all you need to do is push the framing square up against the bearing until you're on the bearing, and then you're pulling the fence forward until it touches it, and then securing the fence. Because it's a round bit, it's a router, it doesn't matter whether your fence is perfectly parallel to the machine or to the track, because you're not going to be using that. All that matters is that the fence is aligned with the bearing. So now that I have the fence aligned with the bearing, the next thing I need to do is I need to get the height of the bit correct. And I don't know if you noticed, when I was cutting the rails and stiles, I actually cut an extra piece. And that's because whenever you're making doors, you should always have a test piece, especially when using the router table, because you're going to have to fine tune the height of the bit for both the stiles and the rails to get them to align perfectly. So you want to do that on your test pieces rather than on your final pieces. Okay, so to line up the bit, as far as the height wise, all I'm trying to do right now is eyeball the distance from the bottom of the top cutter to the top of the rail, and then from the top of the bottom cutter to the bottom of the rail. And ideally, we're going to get those zeroed in so that it's the same width on the top as it is on the bottom, which means our tenon will be perfectly centered. The other thing I'm doing is I'm using what's called a coping sled. I actually have another video showing how to make this. It's really fast and really simple. And I'll leave a link to that in the description. But the reason I'm using this is it's going to support the back of the rail, and it's also going to support the bottom of the rail, which means there'll be no tear out or blowout when the bit comes through the end, leaving a nice, clean, crisp cut. Same thing on the bottom. There'll be no tear out or chip out on the face, which is going to save you work when it comes time for prepping for paint. And if you're doing a stain quality door, damaging the face of it, kind of beyond reasonable repair. So this is the first pass with the coping sled to get the height of the router bit dialed in. Don't be discouraged if this takes you a few times. I think it took me four attempts to get this perfectly lined up before I moved on to cut all of the rails. So small adjustments so that you don't overshoot your target, and with those small changes, you'll get it perfectly aligned. Okay, we got it dialed in right now, exactly where we want it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut every single rail at one time using the coping sled. Okay, we just inserted our bit to cut our stiles. And in order to get this bit set accurately, all we're going to do is we're going to take our test rail that we ended up with our final cut. We're going to put it flat on the router table, because this time we won't be using a coping sled. That's only for the rails. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to line up the cutting carbides of the teeth, the cutting carbides of the bit with the stub tenon that's currently in the rail. Now, when you're doing this, you'll notice that depending on your bit set, the teeth could be offset, and that's usually because on a good bit set, it gives you the ability to insert or remove a spacer to really fine tune it. So what that means when you're lining this up, though, is this carbide tooth is the lower tooth, so I want to make sure that that's lining up with the lower edge of my stub tenon, and then I want to rotate the bit till I get a tooth that's on the top blade, and then that edge should be lining up with the top of my stub tenon. I think I have it correct right now, but again, we're going to run a test, and we're going to see how the test piece fits with our test rail. And if everything's lining up good, then we'll go ahead and we'll run all of the stiles through the router table. So I know I've been referring to the bits as a rail bit and a stile bit, but the stile bit is actually the bit that is cutting the groove for the panel within the stile. So that bit has to be used not only for the stiles, but for the rails as well. So here I'm just running the rails through the router table using that stile bit to insert the groove and the round over detail on the face. And now all the stiles and rails are cut and also run through the router table to groove them and make the stub tenons on the rails. And here I'm just dry fitting everything together to make sure that all the joints fit tightly and everything looks good. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to cut the center panel that's going to go in between the rails and stiles down to width. Now you have to figure out what this is. The easiest way to do this is to assemble your door frame like I have here, and then take a measurement on the inside. Then you know that the depth of the router bit for the internal groove, this groove right here, was 7/16. So you're gonna multiply that by 2, one for each side, and you're gonna add that to the measurement from stile to stile, and then from rail to rail you'll do the same thing. Now you are going to want to subtract a little bit from that final measurement. Since I'm using MDF for the panel, I'm only going to subtract 1/16 of an inch, and that's only to help me with the glue up to make sure everything stays square and that the panel's not so large and getting stuck that it's causing the rails and stiles not to align and be square. If you were doing a solid wood panel in the center, you'd want to leave even more room. You'd want to leave about 1/8 of an inch, so 1/16 of an inch all the way around, and that would be to account for the contraction and expansion of the panel itself. If you don't do that, what will happen is the panel will expand and it will end up popping the seams of the rails and stiles, and your door will not look so good. Now I'm ripping the panels to their final dimensions. You'll notice that the stock I'm using here is rather thick. It's 3/4 of an inch thick, and that's only because I'm putting raised panels in these doors. You could use 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch if you weren't making raised panels. So there are a couple things you need to consider when you're milling the panels. So the first thing is the panel bit itself is a massive bit, so that means you want to go very, very slow. Ideally you have a variable speed router and you put it in its slowest setting. Also, just besides going slow, you want to take the material in multiple passes and very, very shallow passes. So I made a total of 3 passes to get the total to the total depth of the raised panel that I was looking for. The other thing that is important to note is if you never worked with MDF before, it is nasty stuff. it makes a complete mess, and the dust is super fine. So even with the dust collection on, it is spraying dust absolutely everywhere. So you definitely want to wear a respirator while you're working with MDF. MDF is nice because it's solid and it paints well, but it's cheap for a reason, and the reason is the ensuing mess, in my opinion, when you're working with it. Now with our rails, stiles, and panels all built up and ready to go, we'll go ahead and glue up the doors. And within mere seconds, we'll be ready to go on to the next step. So earlier in the video, I mentioned we were kind of sort of cutting our pieces to their final dimension, and I said I would explain what I meant by that. So I'm going to go ahead and explain what I meant by that. When we cut the stiles, we actually cut the stiles an 1/8 inch longer than their final dimension. And then when we cut the width, when we rip the width of both the rails and the stiles on the table saw, we kept the width a 1/16 larger than the final dimension. And the reason why we did that is it is very difficult when you're gluing up a door to get the door perfectly square. So by giving ourselves effectively a 1/16 of an inch margin around the entire perimeter of the door, that allows us to take the door and run it through the table saw to remove the 1/16 of an inch all the way around. And what you're left with is a perfectly square door without the hassle of fighting the glue up. This is a much easier approach to get a square door, and I find that it's a lot more accurate as well. And now the last step, I'll add a 1/4 inch roundover around the perimeter of the entire door. I guess that wasn't the last step, as there's always more sanding to do, and when that sanding done, there's more sanding to do. So I'll finish that up right now. So that completes the door build. At this point, all you need to do is install hinges and finish the cabinet doors and hang the doors, and you are done. I am not going to show you the hinge installation process, as there's literally hundreds and hundreds of style of hinges, and that will be up to you to pick the type of hinge you want to install. I did go with European style hinges for these doors to match the rest of the built-ins, and those were simply installed countersinking the hinges with a Forstner bit in the back of the door and screwing them in. I do not have pictures or video of the final door being installed, but once I do install the doors, I will put pictures up on my Instagram. So please consider following me on my Instagram. And if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. And if you like the overall content of the channel, please consider subscribing. Thank you.